12700 Sunrise Valley Drive for the commercial facility. And then it's tying with the existing trail that's at close to the Cold Spruce Drive. And as you can see, this is in between. There's a bus stop in that limits where we're missing the walkway. And you can see all the foot traffic. And there's considerable amount of foot traffic looking at this picture, you can see. So I just talked about, there's that missing link between Colesbrook and Hitchcock Drive that we're trying to build the asphalt trail. It's about 900 feet, and I just showed you the station is so close. It's about 1/4 mile, which is like 5 minutes walk from that project limit. And like in the previous picture I showed you, this is where the bus stop in between, in that section of the trail, where we're going to build a pad, making sure that's an ADA compatible pad, and also the existing driveway going into that commercial facility. There is those ramps, existing ramps are not ADA compatible, so we're going to improve that, or upgrade those ramps with ADA compliance ramp, and making sure that they have the detectable surface. So this is like a plan and typical section where we are trying to install. We are proposing to install a project. This is close to the Colesbrook Drive, and that you can see from the picture is an existing trail. It's about, like I said, 2 feet, and all this trail that we're connecting from Colesbrook to Hitchcock, it's going to be within the existing trail easement. There's about 6.5 to 7 feet existing trail easement off of the right of way for the Sunrise Valley Drive. So we're going to be inside the existing trail easement. As I said before, that the intent of this design is to maintain an 8-foot buffer. That's what the comprehensive plan says. That's the design intent. And existing, you can see from the picture, existing is about 2.5 feet where we're tying into the trail. And there will be tree impact to maintain that 8-foot buffer, but we are considering, maybe reducing the buffer if we can, to maintain, to reduce the tree loss. Same here, you can see we are carb about it. A couple of things on this on this slide. We are minimizing the buffer as long as there's so many utilities. There's fiber optics, power, there's lots of utilities in that stretch, and it goes all the way about 20 feet. And behind that, there is a detention pond. So we're trying to limit all cuts and all the trees, and also making sure that we're not impacting the detention pond. So we're abutting that section of that trail. We're also proposing a curb behind the walkway to make sure that, same thing, we're trying to minimize the cut as much as possible. And the picture on the right corner, you can see the detention pond where we're proposing the trail. Continuing with this, there's about 6.5 feet of buffer, as we're trying to maintain that 8-foot buffer. Somewhere we can and somewhere we can't. But this is one of the areas that we're going to consider and look into our utility, do some test hole, making sure that if we move the utility and reduce the buffer, then it's going to impact, we have to move somewhere behind the walkway, which is going to impact the trees. So we'll have to look into, based on that test hole data, we can find out if we can reduce the buffer or we can't. And this is what we're tying in. And same thing in this area, we're tying with the existing trail, we're improving the curb ramp, and also it's curb abutted, reducing your buffer and tree loss and utility impacts. And the schedule is to complete the final 90% design in fall 2019 and begin the land acquisition in 2020 of spring, and then complete the land acquisition in fall 2020, and the utility relocation winter of 2021, and construction start probably spring 2021. I know there's a lot of trees going to be impacted based on what we have designed, but like I said at the beginning, that the intent of the design is to maintain the 8 feet buffer, but then we'll have to see in detail, making sure that we can do that, or we have to just play with both utility as well as with tree, which is going to work out best. Just to, putting the trail right behind this curb and gutter section may not, is because, like I was saying, that then moving those utilities on the other side of the walkway may impact the trees as well. So we'll look into more detail where the underground utilities are. Based on that, we can finalize our design. Have any question?
Hey guys, had one question. I gather most of this is not in Reston's PRC. I understand Charlie looked it up and there was one little piece that was. Could you?
Most of it actually is. About 600 or 800 feet of it is, yes.
About 600 or 800 feet. Could you just sort of look at your overview plan and tell us where that part that's actually in Reston PRC is located? Just so I'm clear on it, I wasn't sure where exactly it is.
The area that she calls a retention pond is a Reston Park.
Right.
On the north side.
So everything along
where the
the
lakes
frontage
are,
there?
the two
Yeah,
little lake area, wet areas, that's a Reston Park.
Okay, so it comes all the way out to the street. so
Correct.
Where they're coming across the front of that, that's in
That's
our
our-
PRC.
Correct.
Okay. Yes, sir.
It's
Mr.
not-
Butler.
It's the Sunrise Valley, but it is not some PRC.
Okay.
Oh, even though it's shown on our map as,
Right. It is not, it's not a PRC zoning board, it's actually zoned I-5.
So it's more of the corridor then?
Yes, part of the former Reston Center for Industry Government.
What's the pond zone, just out of curiosity?
Well, there's two facilities there, there's actually a detention pond for the two office buildings on Monroe Street. And then there's the Sunrise Valley Wetlands, which is the litigation area for Town Center and North Reston. That was
Okay.
created in the early 90s.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions of the presentation?
well, I understand the need to move back from the street for safety reasons, obviously, but is there any obligation to do a one-on-one tree replacement, especially in that piece that is natural and not going to be developed? I mean, the pond and the wetlands and all that is never going to be commercial. So can the trees be replaced back onto that property that you're going to take out?
Well, we don't actually own that land, so we can't replan in areas that we don't own. It's county, the way the county does these projects, we typically aren't planning on private property. So
It kind
if
of
we get,
removes the buffer from the property by cutting down all the trees. So
if we
that
have,
doesn't have to be taken into account.
if we have a land right impact, if we're removing trees on private property or in an area we don't have any right to be on, essentially, we'll compensate the property owner for the removal of the trees, and then they can replant with the money that we give them.
So in this case, if you're on Reston property, you're gonna give a check to Mr. Butler and he'll go plant some trees for us.
Yeah,
We'll count on that. Just checking. Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir.
So the 8-foot buffer requirement, I mean, it seems, I know it's going in and out, part of its utilities and existing infrastructure there, but the 8-foot buffer from back curb to the roadside edge path seems quite extreme. My little question, is that in part because there's some future thought about either dividing Sunrise Valley or the installation of a cycle track or some other bicycle facility along Sunrise Valley? Is it part of that consideration?
Not that we are
Yeah,
aware
it's-
of.
I can it's, we're using well, as you could see from her slide, we varied that 8-foot buffer widely through the 900 feet of the project. We did curb abutted to save tree impacts for, I don't know, probably half of that project length. The other areas where we are using the 8-foot buffer, we're using not a 2% slope between the sidewalk and the curb, we're using a 6-to-1 slope. And now what does that do for us? Well, when we have that wide space with a 6-to-1 slope, it allows us to bring the grade of the sidewalk up higher and get away from the multitude of underground utilities that are in that hill that's right behind the curb. If we hit those utilities, and we're experiencing this on other projects on Sunrise Valley, we gotta move them back. And you move one back, it hits the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And what ends up happening is it pushes all the utilities back where the trees are. So we're trying to provide some element of safety between the sidewalk and traffic, but we're also trying to get the grade up so we're not hitting every utility under there. But once we get our test pit information, as Sonia said, we'll reevaluate that. If we can do curb abutted, not hit every utility, save some trees, we're gonna do that.
Okay, particularly along the property that we're talking about, next to the natural area.
Yeah.
Any help you could give us there would be great. Get as close to the curb as you can.
We'll do our best.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts?
Yes, I do have a question. So in that case, I see that the buffer varies along, as you know, to save trees and whatnot. But what about the existing trail and that 2.5-foot strip? Are you intending to change any of these, or is this just limited to that 950 foot?
We're just connecting, installing that missing piece.
You're not touching anything?
We're not touching the
But this is just
existing
based
trail.
on the comprehensive plan guidelines that you have
Yeah,
to hold
the
back?
project scope was initially that 6-foot trail, because the existing trail is a 6-foot asphalt or walkway or trail, whatever you say.
In addition to the 8-foot buffer?
Yeah, and that was the project scope, it was scoped for a 6-foot trail with an 8-foot buffer.
Okay, so I would just piggyback on trying to see if in some way you can, I mean, I like that you've been able to not hold fast to the 8-foot buffer.
Right,
Where necessary, try to see if you can narrow the buffer in order to save some trees
right,
while trying to maintain a safe distance from.
yeah, that's what we'll try to do in every areas that we see that there's substantial tree impact.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you all very much for coming. Appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Talk to Mr. Butler. Okay, next we have the comprehensive lighting package. Y'all come up, sit at the table, or whatever you want to do, or is Larry going to be the spokesperson? Whatever y'all want to do.
Oh, sit at the table. I don't sit at the table. All right.
Come on,
A little more casual that way, right?
yeah, might want to grab the third mic though,
Or not.
or steal one off the podium.
You want to do, you try the PDF one.
It loaded up with me when I tested it earlier, just takes a minute. It's a big one.
Okay, while that's loading, let me, Larry Butler, got Rick Landers and Bill Burton, who have been stalwarts of this group. We took a hiatus last year. The staff liaison was caught up in some other stuff, so we're back. You know, Nick Georges and Richard participated early on with this effort, and we are going to give you an update and ask for some input from you all, and hopefully get some specific guidance as we try to move this forward. I'll keep talking because it's still loading. Recently,
You don't have to.
it's important stuff. So recently, Streetlights came back into the news. Supervisor Hudgens and her office announced, hey, we need more streetlights. And wow, it was just pointed out to me by one of the RA board members, I think he was in this room behind me, about the streetlights down on the Seacus project. There are 3 new Cobra head fixtures over Sunrise Valley Drive down there. No doubt part of the public facilities manual requirement
It is.
imposed upon by Fairfax County, but nonetheless, you know, lighting is going to be at the forefront for some time to come. You are also going to hear back from us probably in April or May about the Hunters Woods Pathway Lighting Project, which we got approval for from you all about 3 years ago. That has lapsed, but there's a renewed interest in that. And part of that is that there is a proper commitment from Atlantic Realty's, the Hunters Woods at Trails Edge project, for $81,300 to go to pathway lighting. It goes to Fairfax County, and so we are working with Fairfax County to get an interpretation on that proper as to whether or not that funding can be joined with our project, our current funding, so that we can do more lighting down there, because we don't have the funding to do the whole project. And so we're going to be coming back to this body to discuss that in 2 options, really. I'm giving you a preview. It's getting really exciting, right? For what we traditionally have, which are the old shoebox style, but also what we want to do, and you'll see this in our discussion tonight, we want to do it right. We want to do it with LEDs on timers, and that might require more funding. So we'll talk in more detail about that when we get back in front of you. So
Okay.
tonight, we're just going to give you a progress report, and then I know there's some new members of the DRB that have not seen any of this, and so we're going to do a little bit of history on that.
Hey, let me ask you a quick question before you get off the thing about the street lights and the public facilities manual and stuff. When did they do the South Lakes High School redo? I can't remember when that was, probably about 15 years ago. And I was on the board then. We went and met with Kathy Hudgens, and they had 9 Cobra heads, both on South Lakes and Ridge Heights, which were part of the PFC manual. And we went and jumped up and down, hollered and screamed, and finally got them to be more sensible, and they put 2 lights at each entrance in deference to the noise we were making. And I'm sorry if she's completely forgotten that's how we want to work toward lighting Reston, because the pictures they put in are more than adequate for what they're supposed to do. And 9 Cobra heads across South Lakes would have been a disaster. But anyway, politicians do tend to forget things, but we spent meeting after meeting after meeting with the police because there was an incident report of a fender bender in South Lakes Center parking lot. And because of that, we had to have Cobra head lights. We're like, that's a mile away. But anyway, neither here nor there.
Well,
But hopefully, there's still something we can do.
Right, well, and related to that, you may recall the Sunrise Valley Elementary School over on Cross School Road. They had a PFM requirement for 9 lights similarly.
Right.
And the residents across the street from there, all single-family homes, raised a little ruckus with the supervisor and others. And I drove by there the other day because I was curious. And instead of the 9 that were proposed, there are 4, 2 at each entrance, and I believe they're lower wattage and on lower pole heights.
The still Cobra heads, though? I haven't been up
Yes.
there lately.
Mhm.
Because somewhere there's a hidden stash of the box lights. And I never know where that is, but I've been told. Anyway, short memories, some of these politicians, but anyway, okay,
So
carry on.
it will come up again,
Good, good.
no doubt. Okay, so these are the 2 most important goals from the original charter of the Pedestrian Lighting Working Group: development of a contextual application guidelines for lighting, and then prioritization of pedestrian lighting in the community, common areas, pathways, rec amenities, and even included transit station areas and clusters for that matter. And so what we're ultimately going to end up with in this presentation are some broad guidelines. So as we go through this, think about that and how they might be applied. And we'll get more specific in our ask, but what we're really going to ask for is to work on a kind of an overall guideline. And, you know, for the DRB to perhaps adopt what it looks at lighting in Reston. Lighting over which the DRB has purview. I know we'd like to extend that, but.
Thank you.
So the framework was really, and I'm not going to read everything in here word for word, but it needs outdoor lighting should be carefully designed, placement intensity for the specific purpose, and, you know, here are the general goals: promote safety, conserve energy. We all want to be good neighbors. Reduce sky glow, protect the ecology, the flora and fauna. We worked with the Environmental Advisory Committee on this. And for those of you who are familiar with the RAISER report that they put together, there's a whole section on lighting, and we've actually adopted some of those guidelines, which you'll see a little bit later. And then here I'm going to turn it over to Bill Burton, because he really orchestrated with the group the immense amount of field work that went into this, and then so he's going to have the next few slides. So I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you. Which one is just, that's just advanced?
The right one. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So we actually had two lines of effort going forward. One was to do homework and look at what other communities had done as far as lighting plans. And we, you know, there's a community in Arizona, there's one in California, they had nice things written up. Also, there was something called the Model Lighting Ordinance, which was developed by the International Dark Sky Association and the Illumination Engineers Society. And they put together something that could be adapted by communities at large. But we knew Reston being unique, we would have to really tailor that to our own situation. So that was going forward, and from that we got lighting zones, which I'll cover in a minute. And the other thing that was happening was we actually physically walked around. I walked every path in South Reston. I mapped existing lighting, and then I also, as an exercise, noted areas where if the public really wanted it, we might locate new lights. Now, those proposed lights were strictly my idea. They're not on the map that you will see. But we also had a database from RA of the existing pathway lights. So we took that, and then we took the zone concept from the model lighting ordinance and the other communities, and we fit them onto a map of Reston and said, if we were going to adopt this zone concept, what areas would be what? So, and then, as I say, we were walking around, and another member was also biking. So we have really kind of two things. We have the traditional RA walk pathways, and then we have travel corridors along certain roads that we felt reflected potential high use for, say, bicycles and pedestrians. So both those things are on the map that we're going to show you. So first, the lighting zones. Again, we took the model ordinance lighting zones and we adapted those and rewrote the definitions to include the types of land use that we see in Reston. And then we studied the corridors and so on. So the next slide, okay, here are the lighting zones. I'm not going to go through them, but again, they're adopted from the MLO, reconfigured for Reston use, and I'll discuss them when I go to the map, which is the next slide. So here's the map. This is from ArcGIS database from RA, and it's split into, the zones are hard to see here, but maybe you can see it. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. I need where's the laser button?
So it's an
Laser doesn't work
LCD,
on
so
the
it won't
screen.
work. So if you want to take the microphone up,
Okay.
and
All right.
do it that way.
So we had 4 zones, and you'll see the definitions better in your definition. Zone 0 are areas with no existing lights, and these are things like the stream valleys. These are areas where we want to preserve darkness. So we have the stream valleys and other open areas, including the golf courses and unlighted playing fields like Barron Cameron Park. So those are zone 0. Zone 1 are kind of the traditional residential area in Reston. You know, most of the PRC would be zone 1. And those may or may not need additional lighting depending on, you know, demand or need or something. Those were most of the areas where I looked at and I said, well, if we had to put in another light, you know, I would maybe put in here. Zone 2 are areas that include the village centers and the schools. And those have some brightly lit, I may have this wrong. Do I have this wrong? No, village centers, commercial parking lots, schools, and athletic fields. So that's zone 2. There's a demonstrated obvious need for lighting. And there, the thing is, would be when we change over lighting, we want to put in lighting that adheres to our new guidelines. So those areas have lighting. They will need lighting in the future. When we replace that lighting, it needs to be good lighting. And then zone 3 is the transportation corridor and Reston Town Center, and, you know, which is our most urban place. So the idea with the map is to clearly define these areas so that there's no ambiguity when these kinds of lighting requests come up. You know, we can look at a specific spot on the map, see where, you know, people are living, and we can say you're in zone 1. This is what we recommend. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but this is the framework that we are suggesting you work with as we move forward. And then the corridors are shown on here. They're not real clear, but the darker green are what we thought would be major transportation corridors for bicyclists and maybe pedestrians. And then the slightly lesser, lower use ones are in yellow. And as I said, whatever existing lights are on here are shown in green dots, and that's from the RA database. What's new since last year is the proposed Hunter's Woods area, and that's outlined in here where they're proposing new pathway lights, because that's actually a rather high transit area. And in fact, we have it in zone 1. It probably should be more accurately now be called zone 2, because it's a typical example. That's an area that's feeding into a village center. So the areas around village center where you anticipate kind of increased pedestrian flow, those might be, you know, zone 2 and kind of in a restricted sense. But the average residential area will be zone 1, and then, you know, our good forested woodlands and lakes and all that would be zone 0. Do I have any questions on the map right now from what I've said so far? And you'll have, you know, we have full-size paper copies and you can study those at your leisure. Yes, sir?
Yeah, so these are existing conditions, or are these what you proposed, what you want?
Okay, it's partly based. So what we did was take the MLO lighting zones and we said, how do we fit that in here given the existing level of lighting? So, and then we fit the zones to really on the map of Reston. So in a way, yes, it does reflect existing lighting. Any other questions?
Wherever I see a 2 next to a 0 or a 1, I guess I zero in on those as contrasting, and mostly that's happening at the schools. And like you said, some have ball fields, others don't. Some are embedded in residential communities, others aren't. And so I would just question whether all schools automatically get a 2. For instance, the Aldrin School is next to a 0 with the unlit Barron Cameron fields. And, you know, the way that site is laid out, the parking lots are well buffered from the street. The parking lot lighting doesn't have an impact on the neighborhood so much. But, you know, I guess it gets to Mike's question. I don't want to suggest that every school in Reston can be lit to a 2. South Lakes is very different. South Lakes High School It's very different from Aldrin Elementary
Yeah.
or Lake Ann Elementary or, almost any of the elementary schools that aren't playing field oriented.
Yeah.
Comment?
Well, that would be something we would, happy to work with you and change on the map. I did my field work in South Reston, so I was most intimate with that. And I wasn't aware of that, but that might be something we want to consider, is downgrade those schools that don't have ball fields to a 1, I guess, And, you guys are probably going to tweak these zone definitions anyways, and we'll probably alter, as you review this, we'll probably be altering some of these boundaries.
Well, some of this, I mean, if the goal is to turn these into guidelines of some form, we would still be reviewing any of this anyway. So if you graded all the schools as 2s or whatever, they'd still have to come here for us to review the lighting. And we could
Right.
go, oh, no, there's houses across the street, we don't think so.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't lock us into saying a 2 is a 2 and that's that.
Yeah.
But I like
Still-
your idea of 2s being ball field schools
Yeah.
and 1s being schools that don't have a lot of
Yeah,
Yeah.
stuff.
right,
Yeah.
you might have a 1.5 in there.
Yeah. So this is a
Smaller schools.
template, and the definitions of the different parts of the template can be, revised and,
Right.
and refined to best fit, not only what's existing in Reston, but what we want to see in the future. And my concern, I'm not totally opposed to lighting anywhere. What I want to see going forward is future lighting is done right. And all that is spelled out. Larry's going to go into it in a minute. Starting with these Hunter Woods pathway lights. Let's get those. If we're going to light that, let's light it the way we want to see lighting in the future.
Here.
Anyone else?
Yes,
All right.
and it's just
Yes.
similar to what he was asking, was just that what we have in commercial areas that abut residential areas. And this may come later on in your presentation about the lighting that is there and, and how far it is from the residential areas, placement and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, some of those things, and Larry's going to go back in this. The zones have embedded definitions in there that aren't shown on the map. And there's a zone definition shown on the map. And you go back to the MLO, which is listed in your reference. There are things like backward light and glare and things, the bug rating, which is uplighting and this and that. So we hadn't put that on here because it's too much information. But the idea is that there's more information embedded in those zones that you can refer to. And you can use and that would be added to your design review booklet or whatever you call it, based on what is in the MLO. And that can be adapted too. But there's more technical stuff that more than we are presenting to you tonight, embedded in these zones that you can look up later. And it gets pretty much in the weeds. Pretty lumens per square feet, for instance, okay? That's also embedded in these things. So, all right? Thanks, I'll hand it back to
Thank
Larry.
you.
This map is in your Dropbox as well as the presentation, so I would encourage you to look at that. And so, for example, right now, we have Barron Cameron Park as a 0. Well, the master plan for that is that there's going to be 9 lighted ball fields up there, which is not coming to the DRB, because it's not under the covenants. So that will change. So we know there's, this is a kind of a moving target right now. And so to the extent that, particularly in your own neighborhoods where you're real familiar with, what's where, please provide that feedback. And you'll see on one of our last slides, we asked for that feedback, kind of very directly. So with that, let me keep going here. So also noted in the Reston Master Plan that was adopted in 2014, 2015, it acknowledges the improved lighting is going to be needed, particularly where we're going to have more pedestrian and bicycling traffic. They specifically reference the village centers, TSAs, and other high-use sections as identified by the community. So Reston, the face of Reston is changing, we know that, and so what we want to do is make sure that the lighting, keeps up and hopefully gets out ahead of it to the extent that it can. And I know that having been at the P&Z meeting last night, our planning commissioner, John Carter, referenced on 2 applications the inconsistency of the lighting of adjacent projects. You know, one developer would come in and say, well, we're gonna have this kind of light, and then, you know, you hit the property line, and then there's this kind of light. And that, you know, these inconsistencies shouldn't happen. Now, those are in areas where they're not coming to you for approval, but it just kind of sets the tone that there is some inconsistency, and to the extent that we can bring some better consistency with the lighting, that's a good target.
They just came out with new guidelines for the TSA area. I think they're trying to address the lighting so that that doesn't happen, that I've got this, you've got that. They're trying to get some continuity for their street lighting at least, or their methods of lighting, so.
Right, yeah.
Let's see.
So John, in his comments, it wasn't just lighting, it was, he didn't quite get down this far, but what he was referencing also was benches, trash cans,
Right.
plantings, you know, that, let's bring some consistency to these urbanizing areas. So this is where after community awareness of all these not so great things that happen with lighting. So we want to try to avoid that. So, and again, you have this in the materials that were in your Dropbox. So I'm just going to touch on this, and we don't need to go into all the detail here, but I ask, as part of the final ask that you'll see, is that you go through these and please provide us your feedback. But, you know, these are sort of the general guidelines that we think should be applied. You know, eliminating impacts of lighting on adjacent properties, which I know you all are very sensitive to, not cause unnecessary glare, energy efficient fixtures, you know, the minimum illumination required for the frankly, the job at hand. And, you know, you get into all kinds of generalities about that. You know, some people say, well, we need more light there because of, you know, crime or whatever, and others will say, well, no, if you put more light there, it's going to be in my window. And so, you know, how do you measure that? And so with that, the technical guidelines, and that first paragraph is a doozy. So if anybody has read that, there's more behind that as if you read that, you know, the luminous intensity and so forth. But what we're really trying to get to here is that in these more residential settings, which is in particular with pathway and pedestrian, that there's some, you know, basic guidelines that we think should be followed. One of the most important of those is the Kelvin scale. And the EAC, in their recommendation, that they had 3,000. We're using 2,700. But if you go to the Dominion Power website, Dominion Energy, their scale for that piece is 2,700 to 3,000 Kelvin. And what we, in a little bit of additional research, most of the lights that you can get, either through Dominion or others, they don't really break it down to the 2,700. It's kind of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, in some cases depending on the wattage. But the 2,700 to 3,000 Kelvin is what we think is appropriate for the pedestrian level lighting. You're going to see coming up with an RA facility, I think Chris is coming next week, that for tennis courts, because that is an active recreation, that's 4,000. You know, and so 3,000 is, it may be low for actual recreation lighting. If you're trying to chase a
Temperature
tennis ball.
shouldn't have anything to do with lumens. It really shouldn't.
Pardon?
Color or temperature should have nothing to do with lumens. It certainly may have to do with what some people say they can see better, but it doesn't really have anything to do with lumens. So I just disagree with what you just said, is what I'm saying, respectfully.
I'll prepare Chris.
You can well light a tennis court with 2,700K fixtures.
But would it require more fixtures to get to the lumens needed for the recreational standard of play?
And I'm hot on it because the Hook Road tennis court lights are always on at 11 o'clock at night. And if they were 4,000 Ks, that would ruin that neighborhood.
And
As an example.
and if you ask any tennis player, they'll say it's really tough to play at Hook Road because the lighting is so poor.
Luminous balls glow.
Yeah, they do it with golf, don't they?
Yeah.
So with these, going back to the technical guidelines real quick, again, that first paragraph, there's a lot more background information in the reference materials on this. And so we didn't want to put all this up here, but what I'm getting to this real quickly. So again, the reference materials that we use, and when we looked at the Fairfax County lighting ordinance, we were trying to complement that, not not do something, we don't want to do something that says, hey, well, I can't get that through Fairfax County if it's recommended here, or vice versa. So we have to be cognizant of that. And then what we're really after is, helping the DRB create a broad-based guideline, with the EAC's input, with the input from this group, ultimately presented to the RA board. But what we don't know, because we're not experts and you all do the interpretation when you have applications in front of you, is what would be most helpful for you all? How specific does that guidance need to be? Do we need to dig back into those reference manuals, the bug ratings and things like that, and extract that and give you suggestions? Do we need to continue on that line? And so it's really at what level of detail would be most helpful for you to implement something like this. And then what we'll want to do both with the map and those, let's call them draft guidelines when we get there, is take it out to the broader community, get their feedback. Because we may have clusters that say, whoa, I don't want to be a 1. We think we're a 2 already. It's really, again, that's kind of getting into the weeds on the map, but the map is really to create that sort of general guideline for you all to consider when an application comes in, whether for pedestrian lighting or otherwise. And then ultimately we'll get to develop specifics for RA properties and pathways. And recognizing also that, just in the last 4 years that we've been talking about the Hunters Woods lighting, LED lighting it is absolutely taken off. And so a lot of things are going to be changing.
If I could just add to what Bruce said. So in the last 25 years, we've had the dark sky movement, and in the beginning of that, it was all concerned with the fixture. The light should be aimed downward, there should be no glare, there shouldn't be any bulbs sticking down, et cetera, et cetera. And then in the last 10 years, LEDs have come in. And LEDs were seen as a boon because you could save energy with the same amount of illumination. But of course, that's been misused because people are actually selecting the same power usage and getting much brighter light. And the early LEDs were all in the blue area. It took quite a while to develop a decent LED light that had a lower color temperature. And we're there now, so we can start adapting that. But I think what's over at Wheelie Metro now would be considered to be too blue, okay?
Yeah.
So, we're now at a place, technology has gotten us where we have that too. So LED is a double-edged sword. You have to be careful how you use it. Blue has now been shown to be detrimental to health and wildlife and all that. It travels too far. The yellow is more corresponding to what we evolved under.
The sad thing from this board's perspective, or at least my perspective, is that every filling station, every village center, every shoebox fixture that we reviewed carefully over the last 15 years has been replaced by the property owners with LED lamps that are nowhere near the levels that were originally approved.
Yeah.
And, do we go around and cite every single village center or every single Exxon or mobile station or whatever they are now, Gulf, Sunoco, the Sunoco stations?
Yeah.
But every single one of them has relamped on their own, even though we reviewed those fixtures originally. And I think it's something this board has to come to grips with. Do we want to try to rein it all back in? But there is so much diversity of what's happening out there. All of the shoebox fixtures, Vepco's come through and put in the LED lamps. Now they don't have to worry about them burning out anymore because they never maintained them. But they're all at least 4,000. They're nowhere near the temperature that we would have liked to have had.
Yeah.
And the same thing in most of these filling stations. They're not 2,700. They're not even 3,000. So that's why I get uptight about it. Certainly when Reston moves to its pathways, we want to be down in that 2,700 to 3,000. And I absolutely personally cap it at 3,000 and would prefer it be down at 2,700 to keep it closer to how we think of Reston with its dimmer, more natural. To me, it's more natural. To me, it's actually what we're used to seeing. But to try to bring some order to this is daunting, especially when we don't even have purview over the non-PRC properties. The new development on Sunrise Valley with the Cobra, like 3 Cobra head fixtures along Sunrise Valley that has no cobra heads anywhere else. They're different fixture, they're different color, they're everything that's wrong about the lighting in Reston along the streets.
So
So anyway,
20
I just wanted to
oh.
rant like that for 2 minutes.
20 years ago, Richard and I were involved with another lighting committee when the county adopted a lighting ordinance. And at the time, that was considered to be a quite progressive thing to do. We were one of the first in the nation, certainly with this level of development, to develop a lighting ordinance. That's now 20 years old. It has been weakly enforced, I think. It doesn't have a lot of teeth, and it doesn't have the specifics anymore that we need in Reston. It was mostly addressed to businesses and gas stations and stuff, poorly enforced, and there's a lot of gaps of interpretation in between there. So one of the things here is we're trying to fill in those gaps and get down to enough detail where we can, address things on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I think one of the problems we're going to have, to get back to kind of what Larry was saying, is that if we're trying to come up with a guideline, we have to be a little careful of how detailed we make it, because it's only going to be a guideline, and how do we write it, so that it's understandable, and with the zones, and whether the map becomes part of it, so we're determining different areas, can only be this way or that way. Then comes the interpretation of this board. You come in, you want to put 6 balusters across the front of your house, or whatever the heck it happens to be. We then have to interpret it in a certain way. And then the last thing we get into is, what does staff do? If we say, okay, you can only put 3 in there, and it can only be X high, this many lumens, and yada, 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 and then, okay, you put them in, how does anybody know what you put in? How can staff go out with a little meter or something and go, yeah, it's 2,700, or, how do you enforce this? And
They
that's
have light
another.
meters on your iPhone now.
Yeah, probably. But it's just, these are things that when we put together a guideline, we have to think about, how does this eventually get applied, and what are we going to have to know, what's the applicant going to have to know, and what's staff going to have to know for all this to work. And if we go through our guidelines, good evening, with guidelines are now only, 1,000 pages long, just read them, then you'll get a general idea of what you're up against, because they are very general, and all the specific, the work you guys have done is unbelievable in terms of the volume of what you've done. How we cull that down to something that can be an understandable guideline that can then subsequently be enforced is going to be the real challenge here. And a number like 2,700 may or may not mean anything to anybody putting an application in. I don't know.
It needs to. It needs to start
I
to be
understand
understood.
that, but how many people on the board are going to understand it?
I think it's more understood than it was 5 years ago, because we see how wrong it is. Everyone can drive down the street and see that light's a lot brighter and a lot bluer than the next light down the road. So everyone's getting more educated about it. They buy something at Home Depot, they take it home, and it wasn't what they thought they were getting.
Your case in point about the gas stations that are all of a sudden brighter than they used to be, and no one's can do anything about it.
Well, we can do something about it if we choose to, but
Larry,
It's
are you
daunting.
familiar with the relighting over at the Reston Community Center?
No.
They've taken out the old rustic fixtures, which really didn't put out much light, and put in LEDs. They are so intense, you have to walk around with your head down, because they hurt your eyes if you try to look out. But I'm sure we never saw anything
I
on
don't
them.
recall them coming
And
here.
you've been here a long
Are
time.
they on cover, are they on like a shoebox?
They're just little square shoes. They took off the arm with the round globy things and put these little boxes out there hanging off the poles. But they are really, they needed light. That was kind of dark back in there. But I'm sure the people in those townhouses on the south side of that place are pitching some kind of because there is no cutoff. Those things are just right on their windows. And, but we've never seen anything. I guess we can write it up and get them in here.
Yeah.
But
that's what we do.
The other,
Most of our pedestrian lights we're recommending, 15, 20
if
high,
that,
so
yeah.
they're certainly lower. And
well, these were the existing poles, and that's probably they're maybe 15 feet. They're not very high. But
One
they're
thing
in your face.
I would encourage you to do too, if you go to the Dominion Energy website, and one of the main tabs at the top, you go to outdoor lighting and just kind of fish around. That's where I got that Kelvin Scale thing. There's if you click on LED in one of the 2 panels, it'll take you to the fixtures that are available. So they make a decorative shoebox. Now, they don't have pedestrian height poles that you can get, but they do have these decorative shoeboxes. However, they don't make it in anything less than, I think, they might make it in 3,000 is the lowest Kelvin they have. But if, there's also a really interesting guide in there on the type of distribution that the light has. So like type 1 is kind of a linear distribution. Type 2 is a little bit less linear and tighter, up to type 5, which is basically this sunspot right below the light. So a type 1 distribution, which has this linear, output, is what we would need. Well, they don't make that in a 3,000 Kelvin. They only do the type 3 and 4 distributions. And so, in that case, it might be that you have to have more poles and more lights to cover the same area. So those are the kinds of things that we're gonna, from the pathway standpoint, we're gonna have to
Well,
look
you
at.
might have to have a commitment from a manufacturer if you're going out and buy 500 or 1,000 of these fixtures, they'll make what you want. I mean, if you go to buy 3, no, but if you commit to a vendor that you want this pattern,
Right, and that's part of the research we have to do before we come back, on Hunter's Woods to look at that. What is the LED and timer option if we have to go and do that on our own without any assistance from the county or Dominion? So
when you
again,
say
it's just,
timer, I assume you mean photocell.
Timers are different than photocells.
it can be a photocell, but actually it'd be more of a timer because it would probably go on from dusk till say 11 o'clock or midnight, off from midnight to 5 or 6, so that the actual overnight hours it's off.
Well, that would be great if you didn't have to go around and adjust them twice a year.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say too is that I did have a meeting with the lighting person from Public Works and Environmental Services about that proper. And I guess it was about 9.5 years ago, they did the LED demonstration on, I think, is it New Dominion Parkway or Bluemont over in Reston Town Center?
Next to the Hyatt, yeah.
And they have not had to go out and do one iota of maintenance on those lights in 9.5 years, which is, that's a good story. I'd like to hear that.
Yeah.
When it gets
So-
done, it's done forever. Nobody wants to go back and change it. because
Yeah, that's right. Do it right the first time.
They're not gonna burn out for a decade.
Well, in terms of where does this leave us, what would be helpful to you guys from us?
I would ask that if you look at the materials and then think about, you've got lighting guidelines, and the lighting guidelines are specific, single family, cluster, that kind of stuff. Think more broadly about if there's a general exterior lighting guideline where this could be helpful, particularly, and again, think of that kind of pedestrian, walking, bicycling realm, because that was really our initial focus. But we realized it might have more merit, in broader areas. And I guess the question is, how much more detail do you need from us to generate and help with that? Is it, pulling out some of the widgets from those reference materials? I don't know. I'm really asking, what would be most helpful for you? Because you're the ones who get the lighting applications in front of you. And what are the questions that you will want to ask an applicant? Do you have the Kelvin rating or the bug rating for that fixture, at that wattage, et cetera? What?
There's a series of things that we're gonna have to consider. One is applying zones to Reston and having all the folks that live here go along with that and or agree with it or whatever, versus the whole guideline thing. So personally, I think a series of luncheon meetings together at an appropriate restaurant would work quite well. So, and RA has a budget to cover that.
Here's an idea, an accompanying document that is a manual for the homeowner or the cluster board to explain these things in easy to understand language, okay? So, you don't just throw this at them, you say, if you want to know more about lighting, we've made this manual that explains these terms, and all that. And then when you have your specification, they can look at this kind of glossary or whatever, which is illustrated, and they can see that. I think that should actually accompany something like.
And just a thought, you all should think about this. Reston has this wonderful multicolored magazine they put out every 3 months. I don't know if your panel committee, whatever, might write an article for that and say, these are the kind of things we're thinking about. And just, put your map in there or something, I don't know, so you might start getting a broader sense of feedback of the kind of things we're talking
Yeah,
about.
good point.
To see what people think.
Where in this process, would you have to give it some kind of preliminary approval first? Or do you think now is not too soon?
I'm not sure we have anything to approve right now, because it's a huge volume of stuff, and I'm not sure what we would make a motion to approve at this point.
I'd be ready to make a motion to approve this lighting plan as a concept for Reston. I know the rest of the board probably hasn't seen it, but those of us that were on that subcommittee and saw it a year and a half ago, this is the hard work. You guys have done all the hard
Yeah.
work. And I think it can absolutely make a connection to guidelines that will make it give us a roadmap for what we're doing. The applications still have to come in for this board to do anything. I mean, to me, the guideline is not the hard battle. It's getting the applications for us to actually review what happens. But I appreciated a year and a half or 2 years ago, or whenever that was, the identification of these zones. To me, this is not outside of this board's purview to establish, design, review lighting zones. It's a guideline. To me, it's part of the guideline. The written part that goes along with it, yeah, that needs some work as to how we can make it relatively simple within these zones. But to me, to the extent that we can get the guideline to be helpful, it makes the work then that we do in the meetings on the applications that much easier, because we're following a guideline. And I just don't see anything radical in what you're doing here. I see a lot of hard work, but you're largely recognizing the way Reston already works. This isn't, I would hazard a guess that few people would disagree with this. And that's something you can't typically say in Reston. But I think this is really pretty common sense.
That's the scary part.
It really, and
I think we could entertain a motion to conceptually approve this with the suggestion that guidelines will have to be developed to figure out exactly what the application of all this is. But I agree with Neil, you guys have done a huge amount of work. Somehow we need to memorialize that.
Make it an
So-
action item. Make it an action item.
I guess this is informational only though, isn't it? We sure would like to make a motion.
we just,
You're talking about the map though, that has all the zones on it.
The map.
And that, well, that's what my question was, is that's the existing setup, correct? That's not a recommended setup.
It's
Well, in terms of the
exist,
zones.
it is recommended,
It's recommended.
but it incorporates what's existing. So in other words, if there's an area that is already moderately lighted, pathways in particular, then we have incorporated that, and that's generally, a zone one, unless it's
Gotcha.
immediately adjacent to a village.
Because I just look at, I know Reston where I live, so I know I live right by Hook Road, right by Wainwright Park, where there are lights that can turn on with timers that, people can go play basketball or the tennis, what we were talking about earlier. And they're not really labeled on here. They're not labeled a 1, a 2, so if, let's say, Wainwright Park had new lights come to the board, I don't know if it just needs a little bit more detail on some of those certain little parks, because I know there was a big, Lake Newport Park wanted to put up lights, and that turned, on the soccer fields, that turned into a, neighbors up next to all raised their arms, and that was shot down right away. So little things like that, that's labeled a 0 right now. But in the comprehensive plan, you mentioned Barron Cameron has plans to put on lights, and it's a 0 right now. So if they came before us with lights, which I guess is not in our purview technically, but, so I guess there's just maybe some more refining on the map.
Yeah, it
that
does.
needs to be
That's
kinda
a
done.
good suggestion. I mean, we can go back, the level of detail we can put in this map, unfortunately, when you see it in small printout, it's you need a magnifying glass, but, in the big context or online, you can get into that granularity. And we can certainly do that, Barron Cameron, there's other light facilities that we can parse out of some of the bigger areas. We didn't do, even like
It
Brown's
is a
Chapel.
guideline.
to the extent that we
after
had
all.
a subcommittee a couple of years ago, I think we ought to reconvene it and or reappoint, since maybe not everyone's here that was there then. And fine tune the map, which maybe is what we thought we were doing 2 years ago, and get it to the point where we can adopt it. So I think we need a working group from the board to get back into
Okay.
it. Now that you guys have taken it to the next step.
And I think with that, then also, if you have an opportunity to go back to some of those reference materials and see what from those would be helpful, kind of on the meeting-to-meeting basis.
Sure.
To help that decision making.
Yeah, you guys said you had large-scale copies of this map. if we could make those available to staff, then we can try to set up a meeting with you all and further this down the road, so then we can come back to a meeting here and give some kind of motion that approves the general organization of the map and so on and so forth. And then we can start working on a guideline. That make sense?
Now, probably we need to be totally prudent or whatever. The lines exist right now in editable form on my computer. So we're gonna need to transfer that and have a GIS person, if there's one available, to digitize. Those lines are not digitized yet, only the basement. So we need to digitize the zone, the ones we have already, so that they can be modified digitally. Right now, it's just a picture.
But we can start with that.
Right.
And then as we get some guru around here that can help digitize it, then
Right.
Because what does the purple on the map designate? Because it's not in the legend. What it looks like it's around
RA common.
RA common area.
RA common areas. Okay.
And that's from the existing database that I.
Right.
Okay.
But they're not all zeros, and that's why that's why I was saying, the tennis courts here, it can't be listed as zero when there's, lights on it. Or same with the basketball court that has, lights on, that can't be listed as a zero, so it just doesn't make sense. So the's a couple things that, and I'd be willing to work on a committee.
he's
to-
I appreciate your enthusiasm, and you just made it to the committee.
So Richard, your committee go and validate what we already did.
Yeah.
To make sure it's current, to
Well,
make sure it
work,
addresses
right.
issues like this.
We'll get together with you all too, just to try to figure
So
out.
we're happy to work with you going forward.
Larry's buying lunch, so we're good. Thank you, Larry, appreciate that.
Yeah, that's coming out of my pocket.
It's all right. Any other questions?
Who else will be on this committee?
Neil, me, and Mike so far. No other volunteers? A small committee. 3 to 3, there you go.
Nick was on it previously, I don't know if you'd be
No,
interested.
we'll leave him on it, sure. But particularly in your absence.
He's not here.
You frequently get
That's what
volunteered when you're absent.
I'll be glad to be in the minutes as volunteering Nick.
There you go. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thanks for your
We'll
time.
set something up. okay?
Thank for all your hard work. My goodness,
Really,
you made your undertaking.
not always accurate, but it's
Fellowship.
Major undertaking. Speaking of lights,
very thoughtful too. It really
I was
does.
thinking if they put up a lot of poles, we'd have a place for our.
Yeah, there you go.
The whole Lake Ann Plaza parking lot is gonna be there, and, it's ball field now. You come in off of Barron
Way
Cameron.
more than you need for safety. Way more. than you need.
Landlords just don't wanna have to change fixtures or change lamps.
They just stick it.
But just they have like powers on their streetlights.
But I noticed a lot of clusters overall have aging infrastructure lights, and they're all looking, to
A lot of
change.
clusters, the Virginia Power owns lights. Well, I look at a lot, but it's certain stuff.
Oh, sure.
It's some photo
People are
metrics.
been here for
You'd
it.
be lighting all
It's
weekend.
pretty small, but
This has been going on.
it's a large copy.
The photometric plan. It's opportune that we followed that route.
That's a lot of time. Carry on.
Yes, I am Suzanne Welch with Community Preservation, can you hear me? And Development Corporation, here for the applicant, and Dave Stemble from Grimmel Park. And we're here with our lighting and signage package. We are in the middle of our design drawings, which is why, design development drawings, and it's why it's time for us to be here. So that Dave walk us through our package.
While the PowerPoint is loading, there's a couple upfront things that I'll just mention about, starting with the lighting, which is, as Suzanne said, very apropos. One of our funding sources is VHDA for tax credits, and they have a very specific 1-foot candle requirement for exterior walkways, parking areas where residents, and that's a funding source requirement. That's one thing to mention. Second thing to mention is that we're pursuing Earthcraft certification as part of that funding effort, and they require that all of these fixtures be LED. The next thing is we are aware of the dark sky requirements, and all of our light fixtures, except for the sconce, have a zero uplight component, so they are dark sky friendly. Lastly, if you take a look at the photometrics, we have no light that is leaving the property line based on the exterior fixtures we're proposing. And two more things. The control logic is a timer with photocell override. The light fixtures will be separately circuited as the electrical engineer determines, but the logic will be the same for all of the fixtures so that they come on at the same time. And those are the overarching comments. So this is simply for reference, a rendered site plan of the building. Oh yes, there's one more thing to mention. This presentation is for the senior building only, also referred to as phase 1. And the photometrics were run both as a temporary, which is after the new building is built, but before the existing building is torn down, and then after the existing building is torn down, which is why there's 2 drawings. The photometric plan is keyed with little tiny, hard to read numbers and letters, but the SL1, which are the blue dots, are the bollards. The bollards are used specifically at the drop-off and pickup area at the front door, very specifically to illuminate the edge of the drive aisle and also define the portion of the plaza that's not under the entry canopy. WA1 are the red dots. That is the sconce. And the shade on the sconce has been particularly selected to be translucent and to cut down on glare. Those fixtures occur at next to each of the doors to the building on North Shore Drive, at the main entry under the canopy, doors on the terrace, and egress, stair egresses, egress points in the stairs around the building. There is a single service fixture, that is the WB1, that's the slightly orange dot, and that is above the door to the loading dock. The yellow dots, the cluster of yellow dots, that is the canopy fixture. It is the fixture SA1, that's under the front canopy. And finally, there are pole lights, that's SL1/2, 3, depending on the number of heads, that are used to light the roadways and the pedestrian path down to North Shore Drive. Pole lights are 15 feet tall, including the concrete base, and we will get to, and one more thing about the pole lights, we're showing 15 pole lights in the temporary position, 3 more once the permanent design is in place. All of them have 1 fixture on the pole, except for 1 has 2 and 1 has 3, and that's based on their location near the entry to the site. I mentioned the sconce, picked specifically to have a translucent shade, and they are used to highlight the doors and make sure the doors are readily understood about the property. This is the single service fixture above the loading dock, and the purpose of this fixture is to make sure that the loading dock door is seen when it's in the closed or open position. These are the under canopy fixtures. They have a down light and a side light component. They were selected specifically to have the underside of the canopy glow, but otherwise focus the light onto the pavement. The average foot candle level is between 5 and 10 in this location, specifically chosen for the senior population, and the entrance and egress from cars and getting to the doors. The bollard fixture, as I mentioned, it is a hidden light source bollard. You'd have to lay on the ground and look up at about an 80-degree angle to actually see the light source. It was picked specifically to highlight the edge of the roadway and provide, in particular, illumination before you get to the area where the pole lights are. The pole lights, I might have mentioned, this was the exact same design approved for the Walden Cluster Association. This sample photograph is actually from State College, and that is a much taller pole in that photo. I want to emphasize our poles, the lighting design photometrics were based on 15 feet, including the concrete base. Moving on to signage. This is an outline, the first page here is an outline of the number of different signs that we will discuss, that we're presenting. So we took a look at precedent Lake Ann signage. Also, we know that there are requirements. In particular, the upper left and upper right photo show embossed or letters in relief from a background. And this was the precedent we chose to follow. In particular, this is the sign that indicated by the red asterisk in the lower left of the rendered site plan would have the text Lake Ann House and Townhomes. The cattail logo is just a placeholder at this point. We don't know what the logo will be for the Lake Ann House and the townhomes, but the size of the sign is indicated, and you can see the Reston Association prototype that we followed, and the colors are the same colors that we presented in the architectural presentation for the building.
And how will that be illuminated?
So,
Just small floods in the front?
yes, exactly.
That's kind of
Per-
normal.
Teeny tiny.
Right.
Teeny tiny, huh?
They're not internally lit.
No,
And one or more ground, if it's two-sided, there'll be two. If it's one-sided, there'll be one. And it's shielded so that the light only strikes the sign. And I'm quoting things that you know by heart. There is another sign which is for the senior building parking and directional. It says residential parking and deliveries. It's where this red asterisk is on this rendered site plan, and it's where the residents and guests will access the partially below grade parking garage and also to deliveries. And same colors, very similar treatment, smaller sign.
Will that have to be illuminated, or is it close enough to a street light?
I think it's close enough to a street light, so we will say it's close enough to a street light.
Well, I mean, if it needs to be, it needs to be. If not, it's a big deal. Just curious.
This senior building canopy signage, these are letters that are to be placed standing up, if you will, in a font that was chosen specifically to blend in with the Lake Ann aesthetic and yet at the same time be interesting. The 12 inches in height, color bronze to match the other attributes of the building. There is, of course, some very, dare I say, pedestrian signage that's required on the site. The handicap parking, visitor parking, and speed limit signs, and there's 3 locations identified for the senior building. 1 is a speed limit sign, and 2 are for the visitor and disabled reserved parking. And finally, during construction, there'll be a temporary sign. This is the one that will be at the very entry to the site that directs the construction activity to the right and the residents for the construction period parking to the left. And that's
Should that maybe
complete-
be resident and guest parking?
Yes.
Is that's all there is?
That's all, yes, you're absolutely right. And
Those signs,
All others.
they're all 4 feet wide, and I gather.
Construction.
The 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet indicate the heights, although there's no written dimension.
I'm sorry, those, the upper is from the guidelines, and the lower is what we're proposing, which is 4 feet wide and 4 feet tall for this sign.
It's on the handicap signs, is the one around.
The one, I'm just asking the heights of those. The 4 foot is 4 foot high, is the 6 foot 6 feet high? Or that's just from the guidelines?
That's just from the guidelines.
Okay, got it.
I have a question. Are you just here for approval of the temporary signs? Or
No, we're here for approval of the signage package and the
the
lighting
entire
package,
signage package?
so we can put them in our design as well.
And I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but was there something, I did see a monument sign possibly that would incorporate Lake Ann Village as well, or?
Right. It's part of our, can you get the site plan back up?
Yes, I can.
When we went through our PRC approval, we are dedicating an easement
Ooh, right there.
for a sign. There, but we're not building the sign, we're not putting in the sign, sorry. We're dedicating the easement for the sign, but the design of that sign, because it may be so controversial, it's to be done by others.
Oh heavens, no.
Wise rule.
Okay,
And we're bringing,
We-
conduit out to it.
okay. Why don't we start up here if we have comments or questions? Let's start, Jason.
I didn't have any questions, I don't think. You mentioned the colors of the sign are going to match what we approved as colors for the house, the Lake Ann house
Yes.
itself.
Correct, the logo may, like the cattails or whatever, that
Yeah.
greenery may be green, but other than that, the rest of it is.
Do we don't need to see what logos are on there at some point, do we?
Yeah, I think we do.
We do?
Yeah.
We will, okay. Okay,
If
I
there are
don't,
no logos, we don't have to see it. But
Right.
If you add logos, we'll have to see it.
unless it's a cattail or something, then
I'm
it's
happy with
approved.
cattail.
Just go- Okay, no, I don't have any other comments. I think it's sufficient signage and lighting. Lighting is not my bailiwick for a site, so I'll defer to others on that.
Okay. Just a suggestion, if you leave the cattails in the presentation and then decide to take them off, that might be easier if we approve the sign as we just saw it, then you could still have them. If you decide not to do it or change them, then you'd have to come back.
I like the.
I
But
heard
then
you
if we
say that.
approve them now, well, you have to say, well, gee whiz, we're committed.
Yes.
Yeah. we
No,
have
I'm
to.
just suggesting you just do that. so. Okay.
Okay, no other comments?
Bruce?
Just a quick question, the Lake Ann House,
Building sign?
over the entrance, that's unlighted, is that correct?
That is correct. Let me get to the letters are in relief, but they're not internally illuminated, and there's no light on them.
Have you seen the signs at South Lakes High School?
I have
It
not.
looks exactly like that, except it says South Lakes High School. If it's like that, I think that helps our understanding of what you're talking about. Grace?
Nothing else.
Thank you. I do like the cattails, and I like that you've sort of incorporated similar design from the other clusters. I do have a question about the under canopy lighting. How many of those do you have? It's just that I saw that plan.
There.
Yes. I will have to go to the plan to count them. And
So that's what That's the representation of how
All
many.
those little yellow ones.
The
Right.
yellow ones of how many you'd have under the canopy, okay.
18. Just a follow-up question on that. Do you know if that light fixture, is the light coming, was there any thought of just doing recessed lights in there?
Yeah, we'll get around to you. Just hold on.
So that's
Now you're
like,
anxious.
it's just to understand what exactly is going on. It's similar to what he said.
Okay. Should I
Yes,
answer that?
so I'll just wait for him to go ahead. But yeah, I was just curious to see what was happening exactly, whether they were recessed or just sitting underneath there.
The fixture emits light around that intermediate ring there, and it was chosen specifically not to be recessed cans, which just light the floor, but to light the underside of the canopy. The approach to the building is you are coming up slightly from a hill, and we felt that it was important to have the underside of the canopy be part of the glow, if you will, and not just have light fixture. It's a concept that you see in parking garages. It makes the ceiling lighter, and without, it increases the amount of light without the majority coming out the bottom, if you will.
Neil?
I have a few comments. Historically, again, Reston's tried to keep light levels probably less than most people that are applying want them to be. Can you just talk briefly about how you are approaching this relative to Reston versus, say, you were in Annandale or Bailey's Crossroads?
I took a lot of lights out when the original plan came.
Did you do that for cost or for DRB?
No, I did it for Reston. I mean, I looked at this because we have properties in the district, we have properties in Maryland, and I know Reston from having been working on this project. And I just said, there are too many lights, it's not, we don't want to stand out, we want to blend in. And so we took a lot out.
So I guess that's my concern. In the past, we've asked for photometrics of existing properties for comparison, and I'm not suggesting we go out there and take readings on the existing fellowship house, but to the extent that, especially for the time when both buildings are sitting there, the building's presence is going to be quite present without the lighting. And so it's not retail, it's more residential, it's pretty dark out there now. And looking at your photometrics, I know that in the past we've been in the 4 and 5 foot candle level in a lot of our parking lots, which scares some people to think it would be that low. And you have a range, and it looks like you're up at 10 to 12, maybe under the canopy, and then in lots of places you're down at that 4 or even less as it tails off. So I think you're probably, all of that by way of saying, I think you're probably in the ballpark, but it's so easy for this board to get this kind of thing wrong. You know, we do the best we can, and then, you know, still sometimes we get it wrong. The canopy lighting that Grace brought up was the other thing that historically we've tried to keep lights fully recessed. There are a lot of lights in that canopy, and like you said, it's uphill from North Shore Drive. So they're going to be visible maybe whether they hang down or not. My tendency is to think that it's a little much and that a simple recess fixture would be better and more Reston-like. I think that the canopy is going to have some luminescence even with a fully recessed fixture, especially if it's painted a light color. So I'd really like to see them fully recessed. I just think that's the way we like to do it. Just to be, you know, I really like giving latitude, but I don't like your font. I don't like the N being a lowercase n mixed in with the rest of the uppercase. I think that looks dopey. And you don't have it on your proposed sign up front, but you do have that case on your, on some of your signs. So it looks like maybe that font was picked, you know, the package isn't quite fully, like there it's not used. And just to go back to maybe one of the other signs, if you can scroll to the next slide. So there you see the two lowercase n's and keep going. I'm not sure where I saw the other sign. Is that the last one?
Yes.
So go back. I know there was one other place it showed up. So I guess there, with the residential parking, you're using that font, but you didn't use it at the front entrance sign. I still think it looks dumb. I don't understand why the N out of all those letters is not an uppercase. And I like quirky fonts, and I think it should be a quirky font, but that's a stupid quirky font.
Isn't that like the Lake Anne?
Well, it looks like it's a different
That whole
font.
the Lake Anne sign?
Like,
Yeah.
it says they're the same font, but if you
I thi-
actually look at them, even the A's are lightly different. I mean,
Yeah, can you go back to the,
I think it followed the Lake Anne
Go back to the
sign
Canopy
image
sign.
that has the N in that shape. So we were trying to follow that N shape.
I can't knock it if
I'm
that's what you
happy
do.
to change the font.
yeah, I mean, I think it's a soft capital N.
If it's fitting in and that's what it does elsewhere, I'm just saying, because that's what we do up here. But I'm okay with it if it's elsewhere. I think that's it. And I appreciate that you thought about how it would fit into Reston and not be, standing out as you drive around North Shore Drive at night.
Okay. Charlie?
No, my only comment was all the fixtures were, our preferred 3000K, but the under canopy, it didn't list. And I would hope that those
Same.
would be the same or less as far as because like Neil said, those inadvertently, you're gonna see those from Lake Shore. And you don't want them to be bright blue, white. And possibly, if you have to go recess, maybe some up light sconces on the poles to light that ceiling, to illuminate the ceiling to get the reflected down lighting, would still have, that wouldn't be visible from the side, but would illuminate the underside of the, we don't want to spend your money, but, that, I like the idea of having the ceiling illuminated. I think it makes it friendlier, if you will. You're not walking into a cave. But,
I think it's a canard to think that when you put 12 or 18 recessed lights in there, that
Some of it
that
is
not
going
going
to
to
reflect back up.
It's the same as any canopy. And when you put that many lights in the canopy, you can see the underside of the canopy.
I would hope.
Mike?
just a couple things on the pole fixture. And maybe it's just this picture that you guys pulled, but the pole looks so massive compared to the light fixture, and it just looks a little unbalanced.
Like a retrofit.
So the only thing I would suggest is, I know we're only doing 15 feet, so shouldn't have to be such a massive pole. I mean, the fixture says it's 11 inches, but then when I'm looking at this picture, it almost seems like the pole's like an 8x8. I just
4x4 ought to do it.
it just seems like it's large. That's just something I would verify what size that pole is, just so it doesn't look so chunky. The other thing I noticed was the sign above the canopy is labeled as bronze color. All the fixtures seem to be a dark bronze color though, so I wasn't sure if you wanted to do a dark bronze there versus a bronze is going to end up. I don't know. So I don't know if that was just a mistype, or do you picture it to be a little bit darker, or do you picture it to be lighter?
Or the letter's going to match the railings, because we had a long discussion about that.
The intention was to answer both of your questions, was to match the rest of the accoutrements of the building and the railings, which were dark bronze.
So dark bronze. Okay. And then I had the thing about the surface lights versus in the Kelvin note that he had, and then just the different. It just looks like there's different fonts on the two signs. It just verify that, make sure they have the same font consistent throughout. That would be. And I like the bollard lights. Personally, I'm new to the board, so I haven't seen many bollard lights come. I've had to look at, but I like how they kind of illuminate the path, and it's kind of a nice.
We've had them on both
Yeah.
docks and things like
It's a
that.
good way, because a lot of old people walking around, they're gonna need to see. And that's a better way to illuminate versus, putting giant poles in the air. So.
I had the pole lights on my list and forgot it. I did wonder about doing something more decorative. That fixture that you're proposing, the pole fixture, really is sort of the baseline LED. And yes, we've approved it at clusters that are relamping, but to the extent that this is prominent, even though we're trying to make it nice and subtle at night, could you afford a better fixture than that one? Even your alternate fixture is a little bit not very exciting. I think you could consider doing something more. I'm not asking you to maybe get a comment back from you
But
about.
we're looking for guidance on what were acceptable fixtures. And if there are other example fixtures, you can tell us, we can go consider them. But we looked at the Walden, there's the standard shoebox, we just weren't sure what was acceptable.
Those little LED shovel, I think of them more as a shovel head and not a shoebox, are being used to retrofit old shoebox fixtures a lot. And so you get the clunky pole with the undersized head. I don't think it looks that great. I don't really have
We had
an
another one on
alternate
that
suggestion.
I know, I mean, Wainwright cluster where I live, we did, I'm part of the community, I didn't approve it, but it's like I don't know if that's the decorative fixture, I don't know if you know that fixture. It's like kind of a circle cone on the top and it has the LED underneath.
Yeah.
Is it that
It
one?
looks a little,
The top, up at the top?
no,
No, it doesn't.
I know
it's
the one
it's a
that-
circle pole and then it has kind of
You reflect the light off.
it
of
reflects it all down essentially. It's a little different. I don't know if that's, necessarily,
I
the-
think that would be
Bacon
a step in the right
it's a
direction.
little more ornamental.
I mean, it's not, I don't think of it as overly ornamental, but
Right.
it's certainly more thoughtful than this.
And it's just up, I walk right by this, it's just up the street from this.
Isn't this canister looking thing, or?
Huh?
You said a circle is a canister, or?
It's like a, I don't know how to describe it. It's
Part of this is I don't want to disagree with my
Fancy sketch.
It's like a cone?
folks up here,
Yeah,
but
Yeah, that's kind
I
of what it
remember
looks
that,
like,
yeah.
It's
I
like a
remember
cone downward?
I remember that.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think like I said, I
We're-
don't want to
yeah,
have to
we're happy
disagree.
to look at that,
But I
yeah.
think some of the picture you have right there, to me, with the skinnier pole and the light fixture on there, I think is more appropriate for this installation. You've gone a long ways to make the building very contemporary, and I think that particular light does that. So I'll kind of disagree with the comments you've just heard. I did have a couple of questions now that's back over here. On the canopy, I was going to say what Charlie just said. If we're looking at, like, you've got a down light above your head, and you've got a light over here next to the screen that sort of mimics the kind of light you're talking about. In other words, it's not quite, but the lights go out the side versus just there where lights come down. And I personally think that the ones that stick down are gonna look sort of strange. It's gonna look like a jewelry store or something. It's a little too retail. So what Charlie had said I was gonna say is, come up, you got a whole bunch of columns there. You might figure out some way of putting lights on your columns that shoot up light and light the ceiling, which will accomplish the same thing. I'm a little concerned about on North Shore looking up, and you're gonna get this bright light floating cloud up there. So we have to be careful of how that's gonna be lit. And then the sconce light concerns me because it just spreads light everywhere. And you're gonna have a whole bunch of them right along North Shore. I know you have to have lights next to all of your doors, but that's the only fixture I personally have an issue with. I guess you need something to show people where the doors are. We don't want.
Well, there's an exit from the building,
Right,
so you have to get
You
out
have to have a
that-
light there.
You have to get out
Yeah.
that path to the street, so it's meant to give soft illumination to the sidewalk.
I think it's a matter of just not overlapping it.
yeah, or someplace like on the one little drawing you showed, like there, the one in the middle is not necessarily near a door.
sure.
So maybe
Right.
you could reduce the number of lights there a little
Right,
bit.
so we could do one on each side of, we could do 3 and not 5.
Something like that, I think would help, just so because that's right on North Shore. Everybody's
Right.
gonna see that.
You
It's
could
like,
do
wow,
three.
look at all those lights
No,
on
no,
it.
so again, the point is, even if you only had 2 of those fixtures, if they're lit too brightly, if the lamps are too bright, that's when they become objectionable. You can have 5 if they're lit with the equivalent of a 60-watt incandescent
Just,
bulb.
No, you can't have 5,
No,
it
no.
doesn't have 5.
The point is, if it's a soft glow,
A soft glow makes a difference, yeah.
regardless.
That's what these are, right?
Yes.
So can you tell us, what the lamping is in those fixtures?
I don't have the cut. to
40
tell you
watt
what the
bulb?
lamping is. Well,
In LEDs or no?
I'm just kidding.
What that means.
It'll be like a 5 watt.
5 watt,
Yeah.
17.
The,
Yeah, if it just glows, then I wouldn't agree with 5, but I think that would help.
Our intention was, what we felt made the most sense, was to have a glow so that the entrance was very, very apparent to a resident returning home at any time. If you have only a downlight component, yes, it's perfectly safe when you're getting your key out, but from half a block away, it doesn't.
Sure. Just a security issue, I understand that.
Moorings cluster uses a fixture like this throughout their cluster on the weekend.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Anyone feel like they can make a motion? You've seen a lot of information here.
I'll make a motion to approve the application presented
For signage and lighting?
for signage and lighting.
No stipulations?
Correct.
There's
Stipulations.
a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion is second. Any further discussion?
I think there should be some stipulations before I can support it at least.
And they are?
That the canopy lights not protrude beneath the canopy, and that the parking pole lights be reconsidered for a more architectural solution.
So
You
just
concur with
recessed
that?
lighting. Yes, I do concur.
Okay. And the second
As does the
concurs. Any other stipulations? I think we're all agreeing with the font on the signs. There's no
Yes.
need to add anything for that? Okay.
I think
What,
maybe just to say that the fonts be consistent between the signs.
Okay.
Same with the finishes of the lights. Make sure they're all, some of them labeled bronze, some are dark bronze, just
okay.
make sure they're all dark
All the
bronze.
And last but not least, to look at the number of lights along North Shore. And I'll leave it up to you to reduce the number if you feel that that's appropriate. Everybody okay with that? Motion. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
So can I ask for clarification? I think we have to come back for the actual construction signage, do we? And,
No, this is
So
an
we
old
don't care
Oh,
about
we don't.
construction signage.
okay,
You can come back if you want.
Yeah. No, we like to see.
And we
it.
did approve it with the little dandelions on it, or whatever those things are.
cattails.
But if they disappear, you don't have to come back. If you change them, you have to come back.
My cattails.
Hang on to those cattails.
Thank you very much.
I'm new to this project. Is there a parking
Thank
garage?
you very much.
Yeah, you go all the way around the back and go underneath.
You know how many old people are gonna hit their cars in that thing?
These aren't all.
That's what the
My
bollards are for.
27-year-old wife drives into concrete poles.
Well,
Sorry.
I know my grandma, she goes in a trucking garage, she has so many dings on her car.
Don't let her move there.
my daughter missed the garage door.
Okay, we got a couple of other things we gotta pay attention to here.
Bad idea. The tight in and out.
We have a wonderful committee that studied small wireless facility, or what were they, facilities?
Something.
And-
Small cell?
Is that what they're calling them, facilities?
Okay, and what?
That's
it
what
was
somebody,
Bruce, Charlie, Neil,
the
and
government
myself.
called them.
Yeah, that sounds.
And I'm gonna synopsize what we did here.
Did we generate 25 pages of
I
documentation?
tried,
I hope
Lord knows
not.
I tried. Let's pass those down there. What, it's getting late, so I'm just gonna tell you what we got here. There's no action necessarily required, but after several meetings, a lot of discussions, and about 3,000 or 4,000 emails, the cover sheet there stipulates, or states some of the things we thought. We kind of felt we needed some expert/legal expertise as to how the covenants may or may not apply, how our covenants may, are our guidelines sufficient the way they are? We may want to, and you RA people back there, can you hear me? We may want to come to you, and/or you can come to us. We may want to hit you guys up to see if we needed to hire an expert to tell us what these voluminous changes to all the laws and stuff really mean? What are our rights? If we're safe within our guidelines the way they are, just back off and let them try to do stuff or not? We were a little muddy on that one as to what we really can or can't do. These are all just suggestions right now, we're just talking here, okay? Second paragraph, I say RH or Fairfax County to retain as much aesthetic review. It's hard to go through all those staff reports and stuff, but I think RA needs to send a letter saying pretty much that, to respond to that. We feel our covenant-related authority should remain similar to what it has been. Fourth paragraph down, we need to understand the limits of our authority here in Reston. There's some confusion as to, most of the new law says you put these things up on a pole. As we all know, Reston doesn't have poles because all of our utilities are underground, at least in all of our residential neighborhoods. So we need some clarification. Does this mean they can come and stick poles up everywhere? Just stuff like that. We just don't know the answers to some of these questions. Maybe we could have staff or some well-paid person check Columbia or other places, see what they're doing to stuff like this. The FCC applies to everybody. To see, like the lighting people did before, see what other communities have done, if there's some possible thing. And lastly, the RA board, hopefully we can, once we understand more what we're doing, see if we can get them to corral a little bit of dollars, that we could maybe hire an expert in this particular thing as to what we are covering. Okay, then, that said, we felt if you look at the next one, or sheets A1, A2, A3, A4, and A5, and then B1 and B2, I thought if something as simple as rewriting, the A's are all just rewriting our current guidelines to include these things. They're called SWFs, which stands for Small Wireless Facilities. And we just took a shot at just kind of quickly editing and throwing some red ink in there. And if you go through it on page A3, there's a substantial bunch of stuff we might want to add to our guideline. Most of this was taken out of the Fairfax County issues about things that they think. We had a lot of discussion amongst our committee about poles and heights of poles. And these things basically are putting a trash can up on a pole with a little thing underneath it. And if we can get around to saying, we can tell you what color it has to be, we can tell you where they can go. In other words, our guidelines may cover it all. So A is to say, we take our current guidelines, what do we, is that the way to go? Is just to add to our current guidelines? Or the B, and Charlie kind of threw this together, is do we need a whole new guideline just about these? Because our current guideline, just to clarify, includes satellite dishes and antennas. So we want to see if we just add small wireless facilities to that, does that take care of it, or do we need a whole new guideline? So all this is just for everybody to think about as to what direction we need to take. And these are a lot of questions, but we took a lot of time putting all this stuff together. It's not like we're going to rewrite a guideline tonight, but if we kind of decide after we think about this, is that what we want to do, then that's what we'll do. Or just add to the current guideline we have. And then, of course, that gets into adding a whole bunch of other things, and then it has to go to single family, then it has to go to cluster, and Mario's going to be busy, okay? I can see her smiling. She's just looking forward to this. But anyway, that's where we ended up with our committee of, 4 to try to, what do we do to get this ball rolling? So if you got any questions, that's fine, but this is very preliminary. Any questions?
Could you guys enlighten me on, you said a small trash can, are we talking a 12-inch diameter by like 24-inch high, or are we talking?
Did you read any of the stuff Anna sent out?
I did not.
I'll take that as a no. Okay.
I just want to know how big it is roughly.
6 cubic feet.
6 cubic feet.
It's about 24 inches by 36, something like that. And they're in McLean now. If you drive around McLean, you'll see they look like the speed camera, but not quite. They're up on posts. They're like, I think they're brown, aren't
Way
they?
bigger than a speed camera.
Yeah.
Okay, but
They're more like
up
a
on
transformer
poles.
size.
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost what
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
like.
But they sit on
Yeah,
top.
that's it. They're more like a transformer.
Transformer size. Okay.
And that's what we're talking about. So
And my concern is that every one of them has what they call a backpack that they want to hang on the side of the pole.
Right.
And we'd like to see those put underground in a vault, rather than have one more thing hanging around.
Yeah, there are a lot of other questions. How do these things get electricity? You know, if all
We
of our
got
stuff-
fiber optic everywhere, but we don't have electric
Yeah, but I mean,
running
how-
down our streets.
all of this would have to be in the guideline of you're gonna run, where you're gonna find electricity, A, how you're gonna get it there, we're gonna do conduits up and down poles, you're gonna put poles in, you're gonna hang them off the side of houses. I mean, FCC is very broad stuff they're talking about here. You can put these silly things anywhere, according to what they're saying. Fairfax County's staff report, I have a draft of it, they're trying, they gave you 3 options in there, and if you wanna take a look at that and read it, some of them give a little more toward the aesthetic side. They're suggesting that in a historic area, there's a different application process if it's a historic area. They seem to be, Fairfax County seems to be favoring that kind of approach, that if you got a special area, that's what you do. We all think Reston's sort of a special area, not historic necessarily, but is there something they could do? And this is where, you know, perhaps writing to Fairfax County, that might make some sense, saying, you know, and particularly, I don't think there's any other community in Fairfax County that all your utilities are underground. Could be wrong about that, but I don't think there is any.
Burke is a lot like Reston.
Hmm?
Burke is a lot like Reston.
Okay, I mean, so there's some, but it's not many, and that, to me, makes this really difficult to understand. There are no posts to put anything on. So where are they gonna put them? Anyway, so that's kind of what we had. That's just something for everybody to think about and give us feedback of what we think we need to do. And if we think expert advice is necessary, or if we just say, nope, our guidelines are fine, it's all in covenanted area, there's not anything they can do about it without coming to us, then maybe we're okay, you know? So that's it. I have one other item I need to get to, but are there any questions on this one?
Well, as one of the people on this committee that was struggling with what to do with this, as you can probably tell from what we just said, this wasn't exactly easy for us to deal with. We weren't sure what our actual purview was. Fairfax County is responding to the state. The state, as we understand it, adopted even more lenient laws than the FCC required. And so Fairfax County Zoning Department is busy scrambling to figure out how the county wants to respond to it from their zoning and planning perspective. That has nothing to do with our covenants. And so we were wondering, okay, so if zoning can carve out certain allowances for aesthetics and historic areas, are covenants able to do that here in Reston as well? We're not going to get any help from Fairfax County on that, and we don't have any depth of expertise on it ourselves. You go fishing on the internet, that felt like we were out of our depth as a committee just to sort of fish around and see what we could find. Ken was sending us stuff that he was coming across. Communities all across the country, though, are adopting guidelines. Of course, they're not in the state of Virginia, where perhaps it's even more lenient, as I was just saying. So we have the outlines of guidelines here. What we're looking for still, I think, is guidance from specialized legal counsel to see what purview we actually can have on this, rather than just being at the mercy of what starts coming our way. Do you have something to add?
I do.
Because it is coming.
I don't have any, nothing substantive. But what I propose, I presume that I can get this electronically pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can scan it. I'm not the best electronic person around.
Okay, scan or email, either.
I can scan it, yeah.
Either one will work.
You got a hard copy, what do you need, man?
I could also scan it, that's true. What I was gonna recommend, you note in your paragraph on the first page here to discuss with Ken Chadwick, I think it would be appropriate also to discuss this with John McBride, who has more familiarity with the zoning piece of it, and probably the FCC comes into play here, obviously, not unlike the 1996 Act that we all responded to. And so what I would recommend is that let me talk to either Chadwick or McBride or both, perhaps get them on a conference call and But what I'd like to do is get this in front of them first, so that they have the benefit of seeing, sort of
Yeah,
where your
I
thought
mean-
process was going.
Right, I mean, part of what we were saying here is, I've never known a lawyer, except for Tony, of course, give away free opinions, so that's why we thought we may have to go to RA and say, can you guys shell out a couple bucks so we could call Chadwick or McBride or someone and say, can we hire you for a couple hours to discuss this with us? I mean, I'm happy to call them and they'll say, sure, I'll send you a contract, But I agree, I mean, that's what we're saying here is.
Yeah, no, we can do that, and, if you want to set up a time where,
It definitely wants to be more than what John himself brings to it, because we did speak to John. I spoke to John on an informal basis, and he was like, "Yeah, not really my area of expertise. This gets into the HOA and covenant stuff more than, planning and zoning and his expertise." So someone along the lines of Ken, maybe there are other people, we didn't get any other names. But yeah, we just feel like we need to have, and I don't think it's a lot of time, we just need to find out, do we have any grounds? And if we write this covenant, whatever it is, whether we're expanding our existing guideline or I didn't mean covenant, guideline, is it gonna have teeth?
right. Well, then I think a good starter would be to get the work that you've already put together in front of them, one or the other or both, to let them look at that, kind of see where your train of thought was going, and get them to weigh in
Well,
on that.
do you think it's appropriate, I'll scan this and send it to you, along with a brief synopsis of what our committee has been charged with and what it's done, and then you could see if they're interested, or whatever. I mean, these guys better than I do.
Okay.
Larry, I think the general notion is that most of the things that are being discussed are in the context of what the FCC has directed as a legal matter for political entities, the state and the municipalities. And I think where someone like Chadwick fits into this is that we're talking about our covenants and how extensively we can address aesthetics, as we do many other subjects, in the context of a little different situation where we're not just driven by what we're looking at for Reston, it's in the context of what's happening, starting with the FCC's order. So I think it's more directly connected to the covenants than to the zoning.
Yeah.
Richard, you emailed this to us, the four of us.
Yeah, I didn't have the nice red letters on it saying.
Well,
A,
they
B,
can
C.
probably live without the red letters, but,
I'll scan it and send it to Larry.
yeah,
Got it.
you've
I
got
can do
this,
that.
and the one I did is I emailed to you, so you should have that also.
It's right here. It's got the big red B on it.
Oh.
Do we
I
need
see.
action from the RA board, or can you contact someone like Ken
No,
Chadwick?
we can do that. We don't need action from the board.
Great.
Okay. Just let us know, any of us that are on the committee, and then we can
Okay.
see
And
what we
tell
have to do.
Ken not to be his chicken self. Tell him we wanted to find out what the limits are, not what the safe ground is. We'd like to push this and not have our community ruined by being scared of protecting our turf.
We did read that several communities have filed lawsuits already to try to throttle us down a little bit. We don't want to get that involved, but there is some resistance to just letting them come in. Because it's going to be whichever utility, because they did talk about having one utility do a whole town, so you don't end up with 3 poles, one for Verizon, one for AT&T,
Right.
that they do want to put a monopoly. So whoever it is going to have a lot of stroke, and they're going to be working for the big 3, and they're just going to want to come marching through.
But for that, the right-of-ways in the areas that aren't covenanted property are, we have not the direct impact.
Right. We don't now, and we
Our
won't
our
then.
question is covenanted property.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's
That's all we have
if
purview
it's in the
over.
state right of way, non-covenanted property.
But you have had some luck with streetlights that aesthetically and such like that you might have street lighting and, that was on,
It's not without a
Yeah,
ton of effort.
the
Right,
knock
right,
down,
well,
drag out,
And,
yeah.
and for the number of structures that they're, envisioning, it would be a battle at every
well, at
corner.
least it could be standardized.
Perhaps.
So they're all ugly, the same ugly.
Okay. Anyway, Larry, let us know what you find out, and then everybody else can kind of look at this. If you have any suggestions, just write me an email or whatever, any, thoughts, comments, or whatever. Okay, then last but not least, this is a very sad day for the Design Review Board.
Yes.
One of our members has decided not to reapply, and
You're
I was
put
gonna
me
do
on
this
the
in
spot.
members' comments, but I didn't want to cry in public, so Grace, thank you for being part of us for this brief, way too brief, short time. And I don't know, we've really appreciated your voice as it's grown and grown and grown. And we keep moving the microphone closer and closer to you, and that seems to have worked. But anyway, thank you for all that you've done. And when you want to re-up after a year, it's no problem.
Yeah, I just a few words, but I mean, it's just been a pleasure to serve with all of you. And again, if the opportunity presents itself, I did tell Neil this, I'll definitely come.
Well, I understand there's an opening.
But it's been wonderful serving our community.
Been
Just
wonderful
thank
having
you.
you
Thank
here.
you so much, everyone.
On that, On that note, I have a question that I guess Ann and I are going to have to sit down and figure this one out. But we're little, and it's the RA board's fault, like most things are.
Look guilty.
But somehow, we've gotten off kilter with our appointments of people. And for the 20 years I've been on this board, every year we have 2 professionals and 1 layperson. Somehow, this year, we have 2 lay people and 1 professional in need of being appointed, reappointed, or replaced, okay? And somewhere along the line, and the bigger problem is that because of that, in 2021, we have 3 professionals all at once. They're gonna come up for grabs. And that's never happened before. It's never happened to have 2 lay people and 1 professional. So we need to go back and see, we've had a mishmash of stuff. And like Charlie and Ken were both on the list for being reappointed now. Charlie wasn't appointed until August, but the way this works is he was taking over for someone that left in March. So his term effectively started in March, not August, okay? So he has to reapply now because that's when his term ended, because he was replacing.
It was actually October now.
Whatever it was. But if we start getting off the March thing, I mean, everyone's term starts in March. Charlie's can't all of a sudden start in August. We'll never figure out what's going on, okay? So he does now have to re-up, as does Ken, and whatever. We need to replace this person over here. So I don't, we
Forgot
have.
her name already?
Yeah, I mean, whatever. But we need to sit down and figure out, because see, part of this, Nick got started as a layperson, and a year later, because we needed another professional, he got switched over to a professional. So somewhere,
I mean, you met the criteria, so that's.
I'm sorry, Julie, I can't hear you.
You met the criteria.
Yeah, no, I understand. But however, there are lots of other things like, we just need to go through it and figure out how do we get to where we are so we can correct it. And technically, right now, instead of 1 professional, 2 professionals should be reappointed right now and 1 layperson. But both Charlie and Ken are supposed to be replaced right now, or reappointed or whatever, okay? And that's gonna mess us up forever if we let that happen. Like I said, in 2021, 3 professionals are gonna be up, and that just won't work. We have too much trouble replacing professionals. So somehow we just have to figure out where we are, Ann, and just, how do we get here? Who shouldn't be overlapping the way they are?
Right.
Say it again?
I'm not sure I care how we got here. We just
Yeah.
like to get back to where terms
Yeah.
always begin in March, and if you're appointed off-term, you're fulfilling someone's
Partial
term,
term.
and it
Right.
ends in
Right.
March
Right, it's
still.
just like the RA board
Yeah,
does. If
right.
someone is there for a year and gets sick, like it happened recently, whoever takes their position
Finishes
completes their
their
term.
Right.
And then they have to get reappointed again. So I don't know how this happened, but somewhere in here, there was an oops.
Yeah.
So that, I don't know what the other professional that should have been re-upping right now, other than Grace, is, because it's too, you go back, I went back through the last 8 years, trying to figure out who was replacing who, and what did they do, and when's their term start, and I find that Ann and I just need to sit down and figure out what the heck's going on.
Right. I would
So-
encourage you to encourage your peers to, in Reston, whether they be fellow architects or professionals,
Amen to
to
that.
apply. I mean, we struggle in finding the kind of skills and of the community to join us. So I think the two latest have been great assets to that. And I'm so sorry, Grace, you're going to leave us. We'll give you a year respite.
Yeah.
Come on back.
The reality is, we need to go ahead and make decisions in January at the latest, so that the board can have a list of candidates by March, so that we now aren't going. I think this is how the roster's gotten messed up, is we're finding ourselves months and months away from
Well,
March.
yeah, because there's no BOC in April.
Yeah,
So if you don't have the people ready to be reviewed by BOC in March, you're waiting until May.
Yeah, it's just,
it's,
the last time this happened, I ended up
Right.
subbing for 8 months in a row until I think Mike finally came along, so that we could keep up full panels. And what Neil's suggesting is that if you're not gonna re-up, you should let us know like December or something, so that then we know we got 3 months before your term's up, before we have to have someone here, instead of waiting, okay, the clock's gonna start ticking now because she's leaving, and I'll bet you nickel she won't be replaced until August or September. Let's just see, because of the way the process goes. And that's killing us. So anyway, we need to figure out where we are and why we got 2 lay people getting re-upped tonight and only 1 professional. We need to see
what term is being filled out?
Yeah, what term is being filled out, and is Charlie and/or Ken supposed to be here longer? I don't remember, who replaced Barbara Byron?
I think it was
That
Bruce.
was-
Was it you, Bruce? Okay.
Right.
So, yeah, that's 2017, and you're up, Neil, myself, and Bruce are all up next year. So that's okay, 2 professionals and a layperson. It's the year after that we have 3 professionals gone. Okay, enough said. Thank you all very much. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
There's a motion, second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Yeah, right.
Thank you all.